Good morning, everyone. We're starting a new series today called The Village, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But I want to tell you a little story. Not too long ago, a 10-year-old girl visited Aldea for the first time. She didn't come here by herself. She didn't ride her bike. She her mom brought her, but but she, like many of us, was a little cautious of church. And yet when she walked away from Aldea, she felt wow, that was something different. That wasn't what I was afraid of. I loved what that was. But she told her mom afterwards, she said, I think we need a new word for that. I don't know if the word church works for that. I think we need a new word. We need something different. And in some ways, I think she's right. Now, I'm not against the word church, but I think what she was getting at was that there is something different and unique happening here. And sometimes some of the old words, some of the old language doesn't always apply. And yet, we all know that you can say that you're something different, but does it actually end up being true in reality? I mean, we all know that as people, we can say one thing and do another, right? I was asking Olivia earlier this week, I was thinking, I know in my own life, I have a million examples of how I say one thing and actually do another. And so I was asking her, what's just one thing I could tell them that I do? I say I'm this, but I'm actually this. And she looked at me and she said, oh, you mean like when you're being a hypocrite? And I said, yeah. And then she proceeded to bring up something that I had done 15 minutes before. And I was like, I don't like this game. We need a different game. But it is true that we do this as people, and it's also true that this happens for many in a church context. I think about the experience of our LGBTQIA plus family and how for many of those individuals, they might walk into a church that says, you're welcome, you belong here. And yet when they dig into what that church actually believes, or the way that they are structured, if they actually want to volunteer, or if they want to be married in that church, they often end up finding limits, and they often end up finding out that they can't fully belong or can't fully be who they are. And so it's really important that we as a community can be who we say we are. And so I want to spend the next couple of weeks really defining what we mean when we say that we're a spiritual community. We're very intentional about those words. And so I hope by the end of this series we have a better understanding, a collective understanding. I have to admit, when I interviewed or first began to interview for Aldea, I had to Google translate what Aldea meant. So that's me being vulnerable here. And I came to find out, as many of you know, that it is the village. And it made me think a lot about really what does define a village. What is a village? Is a village the physical structures? Is it the geographical area? Is it the history of that village? And I think, no, beyond all of that, really what makes a village is the community. It's the people. And the same is true with us here and now. See, the last series that we did was called Own Your Story, and it was about really communicating that your story matters, that you matter. What you bring to this space is valuable. And so then this series, kind of as a nice segue, this series, The Village, is about how we together are the community. And therefore, the community is defined by what we bring, by what you bring. It's built off of the things that make you special and you unique. I grew up in churches that tended to be structured a little different than this. These huge rooms, these kind of dark auditoriums, brightly lit stage, and I guess there's a little bit of that happening here right now, but just imagine, way darker and way brighter, LED screens and all that. But these types of communities that I grew up in, the person on stage, the way things were structured, it felt like the person on stage had something that I needed. And if I could just get what they have or understand what they were trying to communicate to me, then I could be okay. And so there was this divide and there was this split. And the fundamental shift that I'm proposing here today when we think about spiritual community is this. What if a spiritual community is not a place to receive something that you do not already have, but it's a place to encounter what's already inside of you? It's a space created so you can come in and exist in community and find out it's already within me. Now, there's someone I want to introduce you to that I think can communicate this in his own way, in a really unique way. Yes, this is from TikTok, but I think you will like it. So I want to focus on the last thing he said, but I showed you those other clips because when I found, his name is Garden Marcus, and when I found Garden Marcus, I fell in love, and so I was like, I need to show you a couple more things he does. And for some of you, you're like, if that's what TikTok is, then I can get behind that. But this is Marcus Bridgewater, also known as Garden Marcus. He's a CEO, author, and as you can tell, he uses gardening as a way to communicate wonderful truths about being human. Like I said, I wanted to kind of stop and focus on the last little bit he said. And again, think about in the context of a garden and in life. We can't make anything grow, but we can foster environments where growth is a byproduct of living. Think about that in terms of your life, in terms of your children, your work, your spirituality. And again, I would ask you, what if a person or an institution, a religion can't make you grow, can't heal you, but what they can do is create an environment where healing and growth can occur? Think for a second about your body. I mean, our bodies have evolved to heal themselves. That's what our immune system is. That's what happens when we get a cut, right? Everything kicks into gear. I know this a little too well. When I first moved to Seattle, I lived in an apartment with one of my best friends, and we would cook a lot together. And the thing is that whenever we would cook, it tended to be that Ben would burn himself, and I would cut myself always. It was just like guaranteed. Like Thursday night, we're in the kitchen, and it's like I was just slicing avocados, and then it's just like, there's a different sound to people than avocado, and I was just like, And so we didn't. I don't know why. Maybe this is what being in your 20s is, but we didn't have Band-Aids, but we had super glue. And he was like, well, this is what's, super glue was actually invented in World War I to heal, but then we, started using it for paper and things. But but it would always be classic Thursday night, and I'd be like, get the super glue, But something I learned pretty fast is that the super glue, really all it could do is create a space where the natural healing of my body occurred, and it, this happened all the time. And it's true of anything medically, medication, procedures. They're there to help the natural healing process. There's no medication or procedure that does all the work, but they are activating the natural systems of healing to create a healthy environment for that to happen. The same is true of mental health. A therapist can't change your mind. A therapist can't force you to grow or to go into places that you don't want to go. Ultimately, it's your work. And what they're doing is encouraging and creating a space for you to do your work. I, many years back, used to give guitar lessons, mostly to kids. And I would tell them, practicing is the most important thing you could do. And I gave them this metaphor. It's like going home and watering your plant. And you need to give your plant water every day. And you need to practice a little bit every day. I'd much rather you practice 5 minutes a day than an hour on Saturday right before your lesson. And this is true with plants, right? You can't just water them a ton once a week and think that it's going to, figure out how to disperse the nutrients. Um, and so I told them, just remember to water your plant. And most of the time, the kids would come back and they'd say, well, I forgot, I didn't practice. And then I'd say, well, I'm still taking your mom's money, so it's okay. But but this is true of us spiritually, right? Like sometimes we think, well, this church or this person or this retreat or this practice is going to do it for me, right? It's going to do the work for me. And what if we shifted to think, no, this is an environment, it's a space being created for you to experience the healing and the growth that's already in you. I love listening to podcasts and listening to different talks and reading books, and I think it's because I love the moment of insight, the moment where I read something or hear something and I realize, oh, I can apply that to my life in a unique way. This feels true for me. This resonates. And I was thinking a lot about that word insight. Really, if you break it down, it's the sight of what is within you. It's insight. It's sight from within. And if you think about it, even if something outside of you that you're listening to triggers an insight, really you are the space where that insight is happening. The insight's coming from you, and something else just on the outside just kind of clicked for you. And there's a story in the Gospels that I think really speaks to this, really speaks to the power of what is within us. It's in Mark chapter 5. It's actually in 3 of the Gospels, and this is just one of the tellings of it. In the crowd, this is Mark chapter 5, verses, we'll tell you at the end. In the crowd pressing around Jesus, there was a woman who had suffered continuous bleeding for 12 years, bleeding that made her ritually unclean and an outcast, according to the purity laws. Now, before we move on with this story, I just want to point out, especially with the words in italic, it's the author is wanting to communicate something here to us. That this isn't just about a medical issue, but this is really about who is in and who is out. This is really something. This is about inclusion, something that we still are thinking about here and now. It's about Jesus having an encounter with someone who would have been on the outs, who was an outcast. She had suffered greatly, and although she had spent all her money on her medical care, she had only gotten worse. She had heard of this miracle man, Jesus, so she snuck up behind him in the crowd and reached out her hand to touch his cloak. And to herself she says, even if all I touch are his clothes, I know I'll be healed. And as soon as her fingers brushed his cloak, the bleeding stopped. She could feel that she was whole again. Lots of people were pressed against Jesus at that moment, but he immediately felt her touch. He felt healing power flow out of him. So Jesus has this exchange of energy, this powerful, intimate moment with this woman who, again, would have been an outcast in that society. He stopped, everyone stopped, and he looked around, and he says, who just touched my robe? His disciples broke the uneasy silence, and they said, Jesus, the crowd is so thick that everyone's touching you. Why do you ask? Who touched me? But Jesus waited. His gaze swept across the crowd to see who had done it. At last, the woman, knowing he was talking about her, pushed forward and dropped to her knees. She was shaking with fear and amazement. And she says, I touched you. And then she told him the reason why. And Jesus listened to her story. And this is how he responds. Daughter, you are well because you dared to believe. Go in peace and stay well. There's another translation that says it like this. Daughter, your faith has healed you. And lastly, another translation. Daughter, you took a risk of faith, and now you're healed and whole. Now, from this story, it's pretty clear that this moment of healing for this woman is not about her social status. The author makes it clear that her social status was anything but something that would have entitled her in that moment. It's also not about who Jesus was, because Jesus makes that clear. He says, you took a risk of faith. Your faith has healed you. So from this story, we see it was about this woman's courage. It was about her willingness to take a leap. And Jesus is there really to create that opportunity for her, to create a space and a moment in time where she is able to take that leap for herself. Maybe for you, being here is a risk of faith. I've spoken to people who have shown up to Aldea simply because they found us online or some other way. And they came through these doors for the first time, not knowing a single person, not knowing what their experience was going to be. But they took a risk of faith. For some of us, in our spiritual journeys, we've had to risk going against the crowd. We've had to risk making decisions or stating who we are in an authentic way. And then sometimes our families or even our partners don't fully understand. Maybe some of you have left jobs. You've moved. These are all risks of faith. And yet, as we see from this story, it's the risk that makes her whole. It's interesting because this dynamic shows up all the time in the stories of Jesus' miracles. All the time you have these individuals with a need for some kind of healing. And it's their audacity, it's their courage that is really the focal point of the story. There's another story where these four friends really want healing for their friend who's paralyzed. And so they go on a roof and they essentially cut a hole in the roof. It's like something from the Three Stooges. And they kind of lower their friend down into the room where Jesus was. And really the focal point is how their love and their courage and their audacity for their friend, or there's other stories where there's, someone sitting by the side of the road and Jesus passes with a huge crowd and this person calls out and other people in the crowd are trying to shush this person, but he continues to call out and Jesus takes notice. And so if there's such a power in the courage and the risk in these people's stories, why is it that we don't often hear about this? Why is it that when we hear stories of Jesus' miracles, they're often kind of framed differently? They're framed in more of his miraculous power than the courage towards faith. And I think it's because in life, it can always, it's really often much easier to look outside of ourselves. It's hard to take responsibility to say, well, if I have the power, if my step towards of faith or my courage has the ability to bring healing in my life, and it's not just waiting outside of me, then I'm also responsible too. When we realize that we have everything we need, we become the ones who need to show up for ourselves, right? No one can truly show up for you more than you. Eric Butterworth puts it this way: God will only do for you what he can do through you. Now, I don't necessarily, look at God as a he per se, but what I relate to about this quote is just like we spoke at the very beginning of service. It's really an idea of co-creation, of kingdom, of God wanting to work with you instead of for you. And so I want to close today, and again, I do want to kind of come back to the idea of the pledge. Now you might be in this room, and you might be in a place of life where you attend all day when you can, and you're kind of checking us out and seeing who we are and what we're about. And I just want to let you know, we love you. We're so, so, so happy you're here, and you don't need to stress or worry about what I say in the next few minutes. But I do want to say, for those of you who you look around and you say, this is my village. I want this place to continue to be here, to be a space for others. I want this to grow so that more people can experience what I've experienced here. I want you throughout these next few weeks to just realize that when we talk about this place, the village, it's you. You are the village. We are the village. And so when we do a pledge campaign, it's really a commitment to yourself that you would say, in this next season of life, I want to support this place and I want to make a commitment. And when we say it's a commitment to self, it's because we're not going to come after you for anything. We're not going to hold you to your pledge and say, you said you would give this much in this year. But really, it's just for you to be thinking about, what do you think is realistic for you to be able to say, I want in this next season of my life and in the next season of this community's life, I want to partner in this way. And it's helpful for many of us because it just creates a little bit of structure. But I don't want you to feel like you need to make a decision today. I want more than anything for you just to really take some time over the next 3 weeks to reflect in your heart and create some space to think about, what is my heart saying? What do I feel honestly called to in this particular situation? If today you've been waiting for a pledge and you're like, I know exactly what I want to pledge, there are cards in every seat. And you can also go to loveperiod.org and fill out a pledge form online. But again, I just want to encourage you to use this series and use this time as a way to think about, how can I partner with, how can I invest in Aldea? And maybe you're thinking, well, I don't have really money to do that, but I know that I can invest some more time. Or I know that I can, commit to inviting a new friend every month, things like that. Just use this next couple of weeks to really think about that. But we're going to transition now into our discussion groups. And if you're new with us, we just kind of take the last chunk of service and we like to just talk about some of the things that we were brought up in service. And so if you're in the seats, you can kind of turn around and find a group of 3 or 4 or more. Or if you're at the tables, you can kind of gather up around there. And I want us to look at these 2 questions. First, do you agree with Garden Marcus when he says that we can't make anything grow, but we can foster environments where growth is a byproduct of living? What do you think about that? What does that mean for you? And secondly, what are some of the radical implications of the story of Jesus and the bleeding woman? All right, let's discuss.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see, no, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountains should crumble to the sea, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Whenever you're in trouble, won't you stand by me? Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me. And darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand